Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Good Roads Podcast. I am Jared LeMay, and there's a new face joining me in the co-host seat this week. She's an integral part of Good Roads and the one who actually pushed Thomas and I to begin this podcast, which may or may not be detrimental to her character depending on how you view this podcast. Good Roads Manager of Marketing and Communications, Rachel Swednicki. Thanks for filling in, Rachel. All the work that you've done in the past at CBC has finally led you to the big time, right?
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, okay. It's good to have you here. It's going to be a fun episode. And all right, in today's episode, we're going to be revisiting a topic we touched on a bit in episode 11, and I'm going to put that in the show notes for everybody so you can just go back and check it out. It's about rising municipal insurance rates. In that episode, we discussed joint and several liability, its contribution to the increases in insurance rates, and so on and so forth. We eventually came to the conclusion that reform isn't the silver bullet everybody's making it out to be, but prevention entirely might help this situation a little bit. Our guests today posit that municipalities can protect themselves before they end up in a courtroom defending their actions, and are here to tell us how. From Advantage Forensics, a firm dedicated to the forensic analysis of evidence from vehicle collisions, and too much more to go over in this introduction, I'm happy to welcome Isam DeBoer and Jason Young. Thanks for taking the time to come in and discuss the issue with us. This topic's something that's very concerning to our members and can go a long way, not only protecting them legally, but also increasing safety on the roads.
Thank you very much for inviting us to this podcast. My name is Isam DeBoer, and I'm happy to be here with you. And of course, we have here Jason Young also, the president of Advantage Forensics.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Okay, it's good to see both of you, and thanks for being here. So, I guess to start this podcast off, we're gonna start off a little bit easy for you. Let's get an idea of what Advantage Forensics is and what exactly they bring to the table. If either one of you can start.
Sure. Advantage Forensics is an Ontario-based forensic engineering firm. We are located out of Toronto. We handle all of Ontario, including the far north. We do cases outside of Ontario as well. Our firm is multidisciplinary, so that means that we handle collisions, we handle road design, maintenance, we handle winter and summer maintenance, we handle human factors types of cases, biomechanics, slips and falls, personal injuries, sports, material failure, and fire and flood as well. Last year, our firm was voted the number one firm in all of Canada for collision reconstruction, so that's a great thing that we like to talk about, and we're very proud of that.
Okay, so excellent. Essentially, you guys look at accidents, collisions, so on and so forth after the fact, and report back as to what the mitigating factors or contributing factors were.
That's right. Ultimately, we act as expert witnesses in court for cases that do go ahead to court. We take cases from plaintiffs, we take cases from defendants, from insurers, from municipalities, from the government as well. We've been hired by MTO on many occasions to do collision investigations of large severity cases.
Okay, so you guys have seen a lot, and you you have an idea of what the issues are surrounding collisions like this.
Absolutely.
Okay, terrific. So I guess we'll dive right in. Looking back at episode 11 of our podcast discussing joint and several liability and rising insurance rates, this is something Good Roads has been pushing for a while, especially in our advocacy day. Joint and several liability seems quite unfair to municipalities having to pick up the tab after collisions or accidents that were not entirely their fault, even down to 1%. At the end of that podcast, we realized that after, even with a reform, it probably still wouldn't bring down insurance rates. So it sort of seen as a boogeyman for municipalities. Is joint and several liability as big an issue as it's made out to be in your realm?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a really massive area of potential exposure for municipalities. You can be, as a municipality, you can be 1% responsible for a collision and then end up on the hook for 90% of the damages, and that's quite it seems quite a lopsided of a result. So any deep pocket insurer, in particular municipalities, is always at risk of being a target in large cases.
Yeah, and it seems like I guess from what we've seen going forward or in the past, it almost seems like lawyers are just tossing municipalities into any collision, any court case just to see if they can get that little extra, because people are not, I think minimum you have to have $1 million liability, and with healthcare, long living of victims, the court cases are getting over $1 million, and these lawyers are looking to get as much money as possible. And like you said, with deep pockets in municipalities, that's an easy target to go after.
Yeah, absolutely. It used to be that most cases in Canada would be limited to about $1 million of liability for normal types of collisions, but that's not the case anymore. And that's one of the reasons why personal insurance policies have risen to $2 million.
Right.
But as you mentioned, if you have a young injured party, or someone who was a big wage earner, or someone who's early in their career, you could have easily a $5 or $7 or $10 million claim for one collision. And if there's multiple vehicles involved, then it just multiplies.
Wow. I guess that brings us to the crux of this conversation. What can municipalities do? Insurance, well, the government is, they've been interested in discussing joint and several liability reform. We've brought them several different models. The government doesn't seem to, I don't want to say excited, but I guess they're not really rushing to reform joint and several liability. So in the interim, what can people do?
I can answer this question from my own experience with municipalities and MTO. An excellent way for municipalities to protect themselves against lawsuits is by making sure that they have a policy in place that clearly shows how different road facilities are inspected and maintained, and more important is to keep proper documentation for everything they're doing from start to finish, from the design phase to the construction phase to the maintenance to the inspection, and then to services like winter services, summer maintenance, all this. If they have proper documentation, most likely a municipality will be off the hook.
So you talk about documentation. That's a really important point. So minimum maintenance standards, does that play into it at all? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. Like when I say a municipality has to develop its own level of service policy, this policy, like some municipalities develop their own policies, some municipalities simply follow the minimum maintenance standards, especially that the minimum maintenance standards is now enforced into a law, so it's easier for municipalities to follow these standards. So if a municipality adopts the minimum maintenance standards and does everything according to the standards, and if it has clear documentation that shows that they did everything as per the standards, then there is a very good chance that they're not exposed to liability.
Right. Okay. That's good to know.
Something important to add and keep in mind, it's not all gray clouds out there. The standard for a legal test against a municipality is reasonableness, not perfection. The standard is not perfection of services, design. The standard is to meet a reasonable care, a reasonable condition for the roads and for the road network in general.
And that's why these minimum maintenance standards have been put out there, because they are reasonable minimums for municipalities. Has there ever been, and I'm curious, because they are minimum, yes. Has a court ever said, well, why didn't you do more than the minimum?
That's a great question, yeah. The MMS, the minimum maintenance standards, were developed as bare bones definition of what is the requirements, because it seems a little bit uncomfortable for every judge to be deciding what's reasonable in every single situation. And judges as well prefer to have some standard to base their opinion on, rather than just being subjective on a case-by-case basis. But when the minimum maintenance standards have gone to court, some judges have actually found that they are too lenient, and in some areas, and have basically pushed aside the MMS standards and said that's not enough in this particular case. The municipality should have done more. And it was, if you follow the history of how MMS has developed over the years, since its inception in 2002, 2001, 2003, over the years, it's been rewritten many times, sometimes as a part of normal policy, but sometimes it's been rewritten as a result of cases where judges pushed aside a phrase in MMS and said, that's not going to cut it, that's not reasonable.
Right. Wow. Okay.
And I'd like to add, just one example of what Jason said now is, for example, according to the minimum maintenance standards for certain class of highways, a municipality is not required to clear snow from the road until the snow has a depth of, for example, 5 centimeters.
Really?
Yeah, 5 centimeters is not safe.
No.
Yes. So
That seems like
2 inches.
that
It's a
seems
fair amount
like,
of snow.
That seems like something a judge would say this is not enough.
So many of the cases where a judge would say minimum maintenance standards are a little too lenient is the depth of snow that needs to be cleared. So again, there are other things that are not even included in the minimum maintenance standards. For example, visibility at intersections, which is a very important topic. Actually, many of the lawsuits that go against municipalities are because of visibility at intersections. And so far, visibility at intersections is not included in the minimum maintenance standards.
There are other areas as well that aren't in MMS, such as snow fences are not discussed at all in MMS. What kind of ratio you use for your sand versus salt mixtures is nowhere to be found in MMS. It's a developing standard that it's really still in its early years. It needs more time to develop, to expand to other areas. Sidewalks were added in the last decade. They weren't in the first versions of the standard. So it's a developing standard that's growing. It's an alive standard.
Okay.
So you talked about snow fences, sorry, and this is one of my questions when I looked at this is one area at greater risk versus another, like rural versus urban, when it comes to liability and things like that? Do you see that in your expertise or in your experience?
For snow fences specifically?
Just anything in general, like rural versus urban. Because urban, you go to Toronto, you see all new methods of modality, right? Like
That's
scooters.
right.
So
I can answer this question from my own, expertise in terms of traffic safety. Most collisions occur in urban settings because of the very high volume of vehicles as compared to rural settings. However, because of the congestion, most vehicles travel at very low speeds. So also there are several collisions. The collisions are way higher than the number of collisions at typical intersections in the rural areas. But injuries are not usually bad injuries because of the low speeds. On the other hand, in a rural setting, traffic volumes are lower, number of collisions are smaller, but usually injuries are much more severe. So from my own experience, of course, I have seen collisions that go to the court and result in lawsuits in urban settings, but not as many as those in rural settings.
It sounds like with the urban versus rural divide there is you're going to have a lot more catastrophic injuries rurally. I guess higher speeds on roads, less safety initiatives, and depending on where you are, visuals, I guess. But like you said, your slower speeds in urban settings result in, I guess, just cosmetic damage to vehicles.
That's true. And don't forget also that, usually design standards and maintenance in urban areas are much higher than those in rural areas also.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
The major two types of collisions that we usually see in the cities are the nighttime pedestrian collisions and the left turn collisions at signalized intersections. That's probably 90% of our collision work, those two types of cases. So with left turns, you really don't have a lot of areas to go after a city in terms of liability other than perhaps the signal timing, which is standardized. So that really is off the table. In terms of nighttime visibility, that would lead to questions about illumination of the road, whether the intersection or the road had the amount of lighting that it should have. In the rural settings, then you get into all types of collisions, lane violations, passing collisions, speeding, loss of control, winter maintenance collisions of all types. So there's really a big difference in the type of collision we see inside the city, outside the city. And that's where the rural municipalities are getting it targeted in terms of two-way stop, intersection design, sight distance over hills and crests, signage, those types of issues.
So yeah, actually that leads me into our next topic very nicely, the two-way intersections. But just to tie everything up in a nice little bow, I guess solutions for municipalities is the minimum maintenance standards is just that, a minimum, and you always want to do a little bit more than the minimum, right?
That's right.
So, discussing lawsuits and specifically in an article you guys have just had published with GRQ, which will be coming out hopefully next week. You have an anecdote about, let me just get my notes here, the Chiocchio versus Hamilton, about a collision where the town was found 25% liable due to faded stop lines. And if I'm not mistaken, just for our listeners, around that, a vehicle pulled up to a stop sign and went through, and somebody missed a stop sign and ended up T-boning them. Okay, so they were...
Well, there's actually two cases. There's two cases that are quite similar. One is the Sofranios case.
I was going to get to that.
That was the one you were referring to.
Right.
Where the city was found 25% responsible.
Right.
They both involve stop lines, which is interesting.
Right.
The second case is the Chiocchio case, which also involved the stop sign and visibility as well. And there, the city was found 50% responsible. Just to put the set the stage for the.
Okay. Yeah. Because we're gonna get into that. So. I just wanted to ask, it sounds like with things like that, courts are getting a little bit nitpicky. I mean, I wasn't there. I don't know how faded the stop line was, but I mean, and I believe a stop sign was back further than the entryway. So,
yeah.
I mean, people may consider that fair, but are municipalities being held to an unreasonably high standard? Do you see that? Do you feel that way?
I wouldn't say so. I don't think so. Municipalities are expected to keep up reasonable standards, keep the roads in a reasonable state of repair. And if they do so, there are many, many cases where the municipalities are found 0% responsible because they have kept a reasonable effort to maintain their roads, patrol their roads, to inspect and improve their roads. And in all of those cases, those are the cases you don't hear about because they're not big number cases. But there are many cases where there's a silver lining to this story where the municipalities are found 0% responsible.
And again, I guess that touches on the theme of this episode is reasonable, because like if you're looking at, let's say this happened in the winter and the line happened to be snow covered, like you said, Isam, if it was under
5 centimeters.
5 centimeters.
This is for lower classes of highways.
Right. Like let's say this was a lower class of highway. Let's say it was under that 5 centimeters. And let's say a good deal. Like you don't have to have a lot of snow to cover a line, but that would be considered reasonable. Whereas we're in the summer, it's nice out.
Yeah. In terms of snow, the problem with snow is not only that it covers stop lines. The bigger problem here is that snow greatly reduces the friction between vehicle tires and the surface of the road, which may make vehicles unstable.
And we're not required to have snow tires here in Ontario, so...
It is not by the law. Of course, some drivers choose to put snow tires, but it is not a legal requirement yet. So this is a problem, is that a municipality, there is a complete section in the minimum maintenance standards, and usually in any level of service policy about how municipalities should monitor the weather, how municipalities should respond to snow and ice, how soon they must respond. the timing here is very important, of course. And most of the winter maintenance cases are time incentive, and they need careful inspection of all the documentation, GPS records, to make sure that the municipality has responded within the time frame required by the minimum maintenance standards. Another thing here that is not covered by the minimum maintenance standards, but it is still very important, is the rate of, the salting rate, how much salt the municipality has to apply to the road, to make sure that snow will not stick to the surface of the road. This is another thing that is not covered by MMS, but it is covered by some other, guidelines from either the Transportation Association of Canada or from the Ministry of Transportation.
This is probably a good time to plug the snow school. And if anyone out there who's listening is not sending their staff to snow school, start.
I think he's trying to take our job, Jared.
It's a fantastic course. And all operators should be going to it.
But that's a good point, because I feel bad for municipalities because they do have to manage so many different issues from climate change. And then when you talk about salt, right, they have to be very careful of environmental standards, waterways, things like that as well. So when you talk about Ontario, I don't know if this is something that you can answer, but how do we compare to the rest of Canada, other provinces, right? In Quebec, I know it's law to have winter tires, right? Or am I incorrect in that?
Yeah, no, I believe that's true. And I mean, that in a court case, if somebody in Quebec didn't have winter tires, that would give a municipality a huge advantage, I believe.
How do we compare? Do you know? Have you seen Ontario versus in dealing with these types of issues?
I wouldn't be able to say. The system in Manitoba is very different, for starters, because the insurance system there is a completely no-fault system. There's no option to pursue cases. The Quebec's law system is different in terms of insurance and in terms of a burden of proof as well. And so really we're closest to BC and to Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one of the systems we talk about when we talk about joint and several liability, something we brought to MPPs, is Saskatchewan's model. If I'm not mistaken, it's less of a burden on municipalities, but still able to make victims whole again.
Yeah, Saskatchewan still does have joint and several liability.
Yeah, but not to the extent Ontario does, if I'm not mistaken, because that's something we've been pushing for to actually look into instead of.
Well, the states as well is looking to reform that because it's a large burden on municipalities to cover that 80% of damages that no one can pay out.
Right.
To bring long-term care to whichever individual got hurt. So there are a few models out there that, but it's not so simple. They're not having an easy time reforming this system. It was put in place for a reason, to protect individuals who have serious damages, to make sure that one way or the other they will get the damages that they were awarded.
And that's the thing. And nobody wants to leave somebody out on the street, especially with catastrophic injuries. You want to make sure they're taken care of and everybody's made whole with that. But
right. Like you have this case out in Saskatchewan called Jennifer New, where she's a 4-year-old girl. And she was on her way to school, first day of school.
My heart's breaking already, dude.
And she was hit by a car, paralyzed for life, and damages were assessed at $16 million for her. There was a split of liability between the city, between the chief of police, between the driver, and in the end, all of those policies could only cover so much. The city had to cover about 13 of that 16 million, even though they were only found 45% responsible. So
they covered almost 90% of it, 80%.
About 80% of it.
Wow. And I mean,
and that's the reason for that law, to make sure that a young child who was injured, who needs that, and it's not. We're not talking about a case of fraud here. We're talking about a case of a kid who need lifetime care. We make sure that they are going to get that care.
Right, and I mean it's a lot on the parents as well too.
Right. So you can see both sides of it.
Yeah.
If you don't work full time in roads, it's it's understandable how the court system came up with this idea in the first place.
It definitely 100%. And I guess to circle back to the original court case we were talking about, the Ciccio, you mentioned another court case, the Sofranos. They're both very similar in nature. I believe the Ciccio one was found responsible. These names, I swear.
Sure.
Sofranos
and Ciccio.
Yeah, Sofranos was eventually found not responsible, right? They're two different outcomes?
There are two different outcomes. It's very interesting. So Sofranos and Ciccio both involved stop lines that were faded or not there at all and should have been there. Sofranos also involved inadequate sight lines.
Okay.
At the intersection. They were both two-way stop-controlled intersections. And the initial result was very, very similar by the trial judge. Two different trial judges who found that there was a split of liability between all of the parties. In Sofranos, the trial judge found the city 25% responsible, found the driver on the main road 25% responsible, I believe, and the driver on the at the stop sign control road 50% responsible. That was the split. In Ciccio, the trial judge found the city 50% responsible, and the driver who had gone forward from the stop sign was responsible for the other 50%. But that's where the similarities end, because both cases went to Court of Appeal. Both cases were large value claims where the city was going to pay much more than their share.
Right.
The city appealed both cases, and it's so interesting because the two different courts of appeal in Ontario, both of them, so two different panels of 3 judges, looked at these two cases, and on the exact same day released their decision on both cases, which is a bit of a coincidence.
Wow.
So the exact same day, both decisions came out, and they were opposite decisions.
Wow.
In Ciccio, the appeals court said that the city is not responsible if a driver acts in a way that is so unreasonable that the city couldn't possibly have predicted it or accounted for it, and said that the city is not responsible for this driver violating the stop sign because they should not have gone forward. That was the decision there, and the city was completely let out of that decision. So the decision was reversed.
Right.
In Sofranos, the Court of Appeals said no. And these two courts of appeal had not seen each other. That's what's so interesting about it, because they were released on the same day. So they couldn't rely on each other as a case law.
Yeah.
In Sofranos, the Court of Appeal found that the city was responsible for the stop line not being there and for the inadequate sight lines. And the fact that the driver had proceeded anyways was not enough of a reason. It was not so unreasonable to have taken the liability off of the city. So the court actually maintained the decision of the trial judge in Sofranos, but reversed the decision on the through driver and said the through driver couldn't have done anything.
Yeah.
They said that the trial judge made a mistake, and assigning liability to the through driver there wouldn't have been any difference in any circumstance. The through driver could not have avoided that. So what happened in Sofranos in that appeal is they actually put more liability onto the city, because we had this 3-way split before.
Yeah.
And this Court of Appeal got rid of one of the other parties. So now it's a 2-way split. And there was a request to go to the Supreme Court of Canada to challenge the decision on Ciccio.
Right.
Because these two decisions given on the same day by the Court of Appeals at the same level of court were seemingly in contradiction. And the Supreme Court of Canada refused to hear the case.
Really?
And did not want to rule on it, and left the two decisions as they were. So we're left right now with these two opposite decisions in cases of stop lines and sight visibility at stop intersections.
That's really interesting. And I guess my takeaway from that is it almost seems like you said, there's 6 different judges, 3 on one side, 3 on the other, making the same decision. It almost seems like you're rolling the dice if you don't. And I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth about judges or anything like that, because they're people like us, they make decisions. But it seems like you're rolling the dice if you even let this get to court, if you're not proactive in your maintenance standards. It seems like you're rolling the dice of flipping a coin 50-50 one side or the other.
Well, certainly, not meeting MMS or not having a road network screening system, not improving your worst ranked roads, that's definitely rolling the dice, or maybe even Russian roulette would be a better example.
Well, it even seems like I'm not going to say any case, but in a case-by-case basis, like you said, these two cases are fairly similar, and you had two different outcomes.
Yeah. So when you think you know what the outcome is, the whole point of municipal cases only being heard by judges is so that you get consistent decisions, and that there's no random, unexpected, unpredictable outcomes from these cases. And yet we see in these two cases that there was a little bit of random element between the two decisions. So and hopefully in time will be clarified, but right now is not.
If both these municipalities, and I'm not sure what their MMS standards were or to what extent they utilized them, but if they'd have gone above and beyond, do you see these being similar outcomes in favor of municipalities?
Well, stop lines aren't discussed in
MMS.
They're not covered in MMS.
Painted road markings are not discussed in MMS, and as Ethan mentioned, intersection visibility is not mentioned in MMS.
Oh.
So MMS really had nothing to do with those cases.
Okay, so I mean,
those were design cases.
Let's throw MMS out the window then.
So you should be following the TAC guidelines.
Yeah.
You should be following
MTO guidelines.
If you have whatever. You should at least follow the minimum standards that are out there, whatever they are, or exceed them.
Right.
This brings another thing here is that, first of all, the cheapest way for a municipality is by developing a standards and stick to the standards. This is the cheapest way. Okay?
Right.
Otherwise, as you said, they're rolling the dice, they may go to the court and they may have to pay millions in one settlement, in one court case.
Well, standards seem like such a inexpensive way to do something compared to paying $16 million a lawsuit.
Of course, like let alone the fact that if they develop the standards and if they stick to those standards, they also saving lives. So they doing their job now.
Right.
To serve people.
And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about: is saving lives, right?
Of course, yeah.
Vision zero.
Vision zero. Yes.
Vision zero.
All right. What else is there? So, I was looking through your article, and in a couple of places you mentioned failing to develop proper levels of service. I also looked through the Sofranos case, and they were talking bad policies, insufficient training, all being catalysts for liability. So that I guess that brings us back. That's MMS, right? And like you said, not following TAC or MTO
or whatever. Yeah. Again, this is something, like I'm trying here to advocate that municipal staff must be aware of the standards, must be aware of the fact that any municipality must have clear standards for everything, not only for inspection and maintenance, but also for design.
Right.
So, like some municipalities, if you ask them, what standards are you using when you design an intersection? Sometimes they don't even know, I don't say that this is ignorance or something, but it is because of, every engineer or every technician or every decision maker in every municipality has their own role, and they focus on that role, and usually they do great jobs in that role. But a traffic collision usually results from different factors altogether.
Right.
Which means that usually it is not caused by a failure from only one staff member or from only one division of the municipality. It is a combination of different things. So municipal staff need to look at the big picture. They need to look how a road can be designed, how a road can be inspected, how it can be maintained, and how we can keep documentation of all these steps together. And this is the idea of the course that we are thinking to offer, is to let municipal staff know that they must have standards for everything, even if it's not your job, for example, to inspect the road, but you must know how roads are inspected. You
Right,
must
right.
know how roads can be maintained. It's not like the technicality of repairing the road. Should you put how much cement? Should you put how much, pavement or whatever? This is like, I know that there are municipal staffs that are excellent in this, but you must know that at one point this must be done. This is the whole idea.
Which brings us to the course that we're
I was
giving
gonna say,
for Good Roads on
you walked right into that one. So
November
yeah.
28th to November 30th.
Right,
The 3-day course we're giving with in conjunction with Good Roads, offering it for all municipalities across Ontario. And the idea of the course is to, first of all, educate your supervisors, your operators, your risk managers about all of these issues in detail, and the risks that municipalities face in terms of liability, joint and several liability, the 1% rule, and as well to go through practical steps to basically shield and bulletproof yourself to the extent that you can from municipality exposure to liability from all of these targets that are on the backs of municipalities. What practical steps can you implement at your municipality to help with this issue? And we've got a couple steps here that we could just tease the audience with. If you like.
Definitely. I mean, I guess further to this conversation and further to the teasers, this is all stuff that's going to be covered in this course. It's municipal liability, traffic collisions, I believe is what it's called. Look for it on the Good Roads site, goodroads.ca/education. Like you said, November 28th. I'll put a link in the show notes. Again, anybody who's involved in municipal industry decision making, especially, should take a look at this course. I know municipalities have been having a rough time with insurance and joint and several liability and driving rates. You want to bring those rates down. You want to save. The best lawsuit you get is the one. Well, the best lawsuit to be involved in is one you're not involved in at all.
Absolutely.
So if you can prevent these lawsuits and mitigate as much risk as possible, this is how you reform joint and several liability. So, if you want to tease us a little bit about this course.
Sure. In general, you want to be teaching your staff all the way down to the operators, teaching them and training them about the risks, the financial risks to the city, to the municipality, of joint and several liability and the issues that can come up. And you want to get them on board to make them part of the team, so that they care about their job and they care about not only protecting the roads, but also protecting the municipalities. One specific thing that patrollers can do that we'll be talking about at the course is when you're going and doing patrols and you're filling out inspection logs and you're identifying areas where you find problems. One very practical, easy trick to do is to what I call minimize the problem. And that means that when you're marking down on your inspection sheet where the issues are that you find, there's a pothole here, there's icy patches here, there's edge of pavement issues here. Instead of marking the entire section with an X, saying that section had problems, just identify the specific area where the problem was. If it was 5 meters of problem area, write down 5 meters and give the location, because you can bet that if a collision occurs there and those documents go to court, the judges, the experts, the lawyers will all assume that the problem was throughout the entire section, which could be a 2 or 3 kilometer section of road. You might only have 2 potholes in that section.
Right.
And you've now just stated for everyone that we have potholes along an entire 2 kilometer section of road.
And even
minimize the problem is one of the practical tips.
Ambiguity too tends to favor the opposite party. So if you're going to be sketchy about the details, then they're gonna leave it up to their imagination. But
it's something you don't think about as you're doing your patrol. You're going through your network. You have coffee in 25 minutes. You have 7 more road sections to do. You drive through them and you check and you check and you check. And then you find potholes in one section, and you're right, potholes. You don't think that I'm basically creating a problem that doesn't exist. If you have 1 or 2 potholes, say 1 or 2 potholes. You don't realize the level of the problem that you're creating for yourself.
And also the size of the pothole also.
Yeah.
Because the size is part of the MMS, by the way. So
Okay.
MMS is like the section in MMS that based on the size of the pothole, how soon it must be repaired. So when inspecting the road, they must also write down the size of the pothole. Is it like a pothole that is only like 2 inch by 2 inch is not a big deal.
Well, it's going to be a big difference between hitting a 2 inch by 2 inch pothole and a 10-inch gorge in the middle of the road, right?
That's true.
So imagine you get to court, there's a cyclist riding along, hits a pothole, goes head over handlebars, and they know exactly where they fell.
Yeah.
And if you can produce documents that say we inspected the road and there were potholes and they were 200 meters down the road from where you say they were, and at that particular section there was nothing,
Yeah.
you're in good shape.
Right.
You're in very good shape, because that means the pothole either was never there or it developed after your inspection.
Right.
Either way, you're in good shape. So that one little trick by itself could save you massive amount of headaches.
Well, let me ask you this too. We've had a sponsor at the last couple of conferences who developed software, hardware that you mount in trucks, and as you're driving along, it maps the potholes for you. How would that hold up in court?
So we are going to talk about that in the course as well as GPS
Right.
systems. It's related. The question is related to GPS systems,
Okay.
where every problem that you identify is linked to a specific location. That's a fantastic system.
And I'm guessing having visuals to show that the road was in fact clean before or during that inspection would go a lot further than just having a piece of paper with a note scribbled beside it.
Yeah. Judges like GPS systems where they can see the car moving along and they see that the car actually drove that route during the time, because not only with a piece of paper, you're trusting that the operator did what they said they did, which is
exactly.
which judges do trust. Until an issue comes up, judges do trust that the person was where they say they were.
Yeah.
Unless there's some, problem with credibility of that individual person. But otherwise, the judges do believe that person.
That's
but with
good.
the GPS system, you can see the truck moving.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And is it 5 minutes to coffee break? Do they see the Tim Hortons down the road and say, yeah, the rest of the road's fine?
Yeah, speaking of road inspection, also one thing that we would focus in our course is the importance of developing an inspection log sheet or an inspection log system, which means that when the inspector goes out to the road, he knows what to look at, because some inspectors have standard inspection logs, some other inspectors don't have, and just leave it to the inspector or the operator to write down in his own diary whatever he saw. And even the best effort from inspectors is just to follow the minimum standards, the bare minimum standards, which, like what we said before, there are other safety issues that are not covered by those standards.
Right.
So if you're already out on the road, why don't you also look at visibility at intersections, for example? Okay.
Is this something in the course you're going to help them with? Is
That's
building
of course, yeah.
There
yeah,
you go.
of course.
There's another reason. You got two things for free today, people.
It's a great course. It's very comprehensive. It's 3 full days. It's case studies, and it's engineers talking about law. So what could be better?
No, what I've gathered from this conversation is develop standards and then documentation, right? Details.
And
very
take the
detailed.
course.
Yeah, take the
And
course.
take the course.
We'll put a link in the show notes. No, this has been fantastic, and this actually seems like a really good place to wrap up for the time being. So, is there anything you guys want to leave us with before I wrap this up?
All good.
All good. Thank you
All right,
very
we're
much.
happy. Okay,
Thanks for having us. It was
So
a
remember to check out this brand new course, Municipal Liability, Traffic Collisions, November 28th. It's going to be linked in the show description. And once again, thanks to Isam and Jason for joining us and providing us with this valuable information. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and now Instagram for up-to-date information on everything happening on good roads. If you're watching this on YouTube, remember to give us a thumbs up, subscribe. It's not just the podcast that goes up here. We put up a lot of information, a lot of webinars, a lot of really good content to help you run your municipality smoothly and efficiently as possible. Also, leave a comment, give us your feedback on the YouTube video. It helps feed the algorithm, get this out to a bunch of other people too. And as always, everybody, until next time, take it easy.